excited because we have an IE alum, Sylvia Acevedo. Been practicing and I still got it wrong, I think. But she's an IE alum of here and another place in California called Stanford. Founder, president, and CEO of CommuniCard, LLC, a breakthrough strategy and workforce solutions company for public and private institutions. Also the creator and organizer of the Feria para Aprender, the largest Spanish language educational event in the U.S. with attendance at the 2009 Los Angeles event exceeding 20,000. Sylvia literally started her career as a rocket scientist, and from there she's had a broad business career serving as an executive for several Fortune 100 companies such as IBM, Dell, and Apple. She's been the recipient of many awards, including U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce Businesswoman of the Year Region 3 in 2004, YWCA Austin Businesswoman of the Year 2006, GEM National Entrepreneur of the Year 2006, Austin Business Journal Profiles in Power Award 2007, and a host of others equally prestigious. And she's worked with former Texas Governor Ann Richards on the executive board of the Ann Richards School for Young Women Leaders. She's also on the National Girl Scouts of America Board of Directors. She lives in Austin, Texas, where she contributes to numerous community and nonprofit boards, including a role as chairwoman of the E3 Alliance, incoming chair of the Austin Community Foundation, and board member of the Hispanic Scholarship Consortium, Con Mi Madre, and the Trinity School. Her work also includes advisory commissions with United Way, ASID, and the University of Texas. Welcome, Sylvia.
All right, it's a real pleasure to be here, especially being in front of the classroom instead of sitting right over there, where I struggled through a lot of electrical engineering classes. So it's really a pleasure to be here. And I knew exactly when they said room 104, it's like I know exactly where that's going to be. So I know it's Friday afternoon. I'm grateful that you're here. Help me understand a little bit about who you are, so I kind of get a gist of that. So how many undergraduates do we have? Fair number. Okay, graduate students. And then interested parties. I see a few interested parties. Okay, that's really wonderful. So as you mentioned, I am a very proud alum of New Mexico State, an industrial engineer, and I actually went on and got my industrial engineering degree also at Stanford University. It is true, my first job was a rocket scientist at the Jet Propulsion Labs, and as a kid, I am part of the baby boom, and you know there was that whole moonshot thing and beating Russia, Soviet Union to go to the moon. And my brother and I used to like to build rockets. And I'll be honest, most of them never left the sand, not far from here, the dunes here, but a few did manage to pierce the bright blue New Mexico sky. So it was kind of no surprise that I sort of gravitated to go into working, and I did some telemetry work and I did algorithms at the Jet Propulsion Laboratories. But part of my story is I discovered that the timeline for those kind of jobs and those kind of projects weren't measured in weeks or months or even years. They're actually measured in decades. And one thing I knew about myself is that I like to have a little bit more immediate results. And so then that's when I moved more into technology. So I'm going to tell you my story and how is it that I got from, you know, building and rockets that sometimes launch from the New Mexico desert sands near here to being here today. And that's going to be my story. Along the way, if you have questions, feel free to make it interactive, or if you want to wait till I'm kind of done, that'll be fine as well. And this isn't just going to be a PowerPoint presentation, so please just, oops, let me do this. Okay, next. I'm an Apple user, so. first, I'll tell you, how did I go from New Mexico State to to solve a communications problem that really is a systems problem? Okay, and how many engineers? Systems, that's what we do. I think in systems. And my background here at New Mexico State really helped me to have that kind of systems outlook, because right now in the world, we're really going and doing a major global systems update, going from really basically an industrial age to a knowledge-based information technology. That's a massive systems update. It's huge. And who can deal with that? Engineers, and especially industrial engineers. We really do think in systems and processes. All right, I also want to talk a little bit about your special edge. As I was thinking about the audience here, I thought, you know what, there's a big opportunity in terms of language. Language is really the software of the 21st century. When you think about the global economy, we think about global markets. And it's true that English is the language of business, but service and sales is always done in the local language. And so language is really going to be the software of the 21st century. And then I thought, well, it's an entrepreneur, so I'm going to tell you some of the basic, step-by-step things from what I call going from brain to bank. Getting your ideas and commercializing them. And so I'll tell you a little bit, this is a good time to sort of tell you a little bit about my story, about, when I decided to become an industrial engineer, I really saw that I really liked numbers, and I liked science, and I was analytical, but I also like people. And I've always been that person that sees things and just gets frustrated. How many of you are like this? You see something and you it's so inefficient and it drives you crazy, and you think, if they just did this and this, it would be so much more efficient. I don't know if you're like that. Well, I'm like that, and I kind of see the world like that. And so when I was looking to what I was going to study in school, I read a synopsis of industrial engineering and how it managed, and that systems, people, processes together. And I thought, bingo, that's me. And so from that one day reading a catalog, I never veered. I was one of those rare people that just never veered from my chosen field of study. And I did industrial engineering undergraduate here. Really enjoyed it. I did a lot of fun things. I played on the basketball team as well. Back then, it was pre-Title IX, so women's sports were sort of kind of given the short shrift, but we were actually not even called Aggies or the Lady Aggies. We were called Roadrunners, because they didn't even let the women's basketball team, it was like so unvarsity and so uncool, they wouldn't even let us be called Aggies. So we were the Roadrunners, but then now they call them, I guess, the Lady Aggies is what they call the basketball team. But I played basketball. I was a point guard. But I had a great grounding here, and then I went and worked at JPL, the Jet Propulsion Laboratories in Pasadena. And after that, I went up to Stanford, and I got my industrial engineering degree there, and my master's in industrial engineering. And at that point, technology was booming. And so I joined into the technology industry, and I started working at IBM. And then from IBM, I worked in a plant. I worked in a facilities plant, and I helped them go from box manufacturing to really high-end disk drive manufacturing. So we basically went from a manufacturing in a warehouse to like the class 100 clean room types of manufacturing experience. And I got to lead that design. And to this day, I'm just really grateful for that experience, because I got to do the facilities plan for basically the size of a small shopping mall, 765,000 square feet. I still can remember that. And it was just a really state-of-the-art design, and it was so great that IBM, we did so many innovative things. Usually when you think about a manufacturing line, you're just kind of following the process. But we knew we were state-of-the-art, but we also knew everybody had to put on a clean room gown before they got in, right? So that always takes time. But yet we wanted to show people the kind of the cutting edge. So one of the great innovations that we did was that we made sure that all of our manufacturing lines and all the high-tech processes were on the side by the wall. And then we made sure that there were windows, so that we could really march a ton of visitors through our manufacturing plant. They would look through the windows without having to put in what we call the monkey suits or the bunny suits, because you literally could not have anything exposed. that helped me get a lot of awards, and IBM said, wow, you're kind of thinking not just about processes, but you kind of think about systems, and you think about communicating them. How would you like to go into marketing and sales for IBM? And so at that point, I went into marketing and sales for IBM, and I found that I really enjoyed it. But one of the things I enjoyed about sales the most, was distribution, which is nothing more than a system, right? So that systems processing goes along. And so I started moving and up in the company because of the way I thought about distribution, the way I thought about sales. Before I knew it, because I spoke another language as well, I was traveling around the world, not just from IBM, then I got recruited to Apple. And so I got to go around the world. And I don't know if you've ever done business travel for, big high-tech companies. You're staying in nice places. You're going to some really great places, going to really wonderful places around the world. So I got to travel all over the world, and then I kept, everywhere I went, I was hired to basically look in sales and marketing, but my forte was I could look at a system, see what wasn't working, totally revamp it, and boost sales dramatically. So as an example, I was hired when I worked at Autodesk. Autodesk does AutoCAD, right? AutoCAD software, right? It's at the time, Autodesk said, okay, here's your challenge. We're going to give you this great job, and you're going to get to travel to the Caribbean and South America anytime you want. Okay, isn't that pretty good? My sales territory is Bermuda, Jamaica, the Caribbean, the Bahamas, St. Thomas, as well as any great place in South America and Latin America that you would want. I thought, sounds pretty good, right? But at the time, there's this little thing called piracy. So AutoCAD at the time was sold for $3,500. And the market in Latin America for products, software products for $3,500, was kind of like nothing. In fact, the company was barely selling $1 million. It was so bad, the piracy was so bad that one time when I landed in Mexico City, the taxi cab driver asked me what I did and who I was, and I said, oh, I was selling software, and I said Autodesk. He didn't recognize that. I said AutoCAD. He goes, oh, AutoCAD. Literally, he reaches out from the other seat, and he goes, I have a CD of the pirated version of AutoCAD. That's how prevalent it was. Well, what did I do? Use my systems approach, use my thinking. We created some really innovative strategies that really focused on large multinational corporations and then the large companies within each country. We knew they were heavy pirates, but we gave them an incredibly affordable price to become legal. And we didn't focus on the mom and pop companies, but we focused on the large multinational companies. Long story short, within a year we were doing $19 million in sales, and my division was responsible for half the company's profit. And that got me another job to work at Dell Computers, and I got to set up their home and small business for Latin America, and the Dell.com website throughout Latin America. I set all of that up. But I got startup fever, technology startup fever, because I'm an innovator, I like to do things. So with 3 other engineers, we started a company, Reba Technologies, and we did client-side software to manage the server traffic on the internet. And we got acquired, which is sort of like everyone's dream. And I thought, this is great. I poured my heart and soul for an entire year in this startup. That's really great, right? And had a lot of stock. We got acquired. There was this handcuff that you could not sell the stock for a year. Well, in that time period, the stock market crashed. The company that had acquired us went under. And all of my hard work. So, sometimes entrepreneurship, and that was like my first step out of the bat, and I thought, wow. So sometimes entrepreneurship can also, you've got to learn your lessons, and that was one of the lessons that I learned as well. Perhaps I should have been as aggressive in only wanting stock, right, and expecting a big payout, because at the time, how was stock going? It was only going up, right? So that was a very risky thing, but at the time my only experience was of the stock market going up. So I learned a lot, and so I kind of stopped and I thought, well, what can I do? At the time I didn't want to go back to work. in a traditional corporate setting because I'd gotten a taste of entrepreneurship. And one of the great things about doing a technology entrepreneur thing is we'd gotten some venture capital work. And I really got to meet with a lot of people who were working on a lot of different companies. But one of the key elements is that I saw, I said to myself, I really want the company that I'm working on next to be more under like my control and under what I'm doing and what I want to do, and I want to manage the cash flow, and I also wanted to manage my schedule. Remember, I had traveled all around the world, and that is a lot of fun. But when you've been doing it for like 12 or 15 years, you realize that sometimes it's not always as glamorous to be going, and traveling all over the world. And also, you don't really establish roots in a family and a community. So at that time, I said, you know what? I'm going to set up a company in Austin, and I'm really going to get involved in the community. And then I'm going to, so have a little bit more balance, but I'm still going to live a good life and create a company that allows me to live the life that I want to live and employ some people and provides a great value and great service. And so, I kind of looked at, we're all here in the world because we all have something to add. And so I always look to say, what do people always think that I'm good at? And what do you love to do? And sort of what are your ideas? And think about that for yourself as I'm here as well. What is it you love to do? What is it that you're really good at? So as you're thinking about it, you might be thinking, well, you may not know that for yourself, and it took me a little bit of time to think about it, but as you've heard me talk, you kind of know, I think in systems, right? I love to solve problems. Companies always gave me the thorniest challenges, right? How can you, for example, when I set up the Dell.com website for Latin America, think about the systems challenges that entailed at the time. Just a few years ago, when you're thinking about selling pan-Latin America, first of all, credit card. How do you know that's a good credit card coming from Costa Rica, from Mexico, from the Bahamas, right? So that's a big issue. So one, how are you getting paid? How is the product getting fulfilled? Here in the United States, Dell was able to send the monitor from one place, the hard drive from somewhere else, and maybe the peripherals from something else. And working with FedEx or DHL, it all arrived at the same day on your doorstep. Think about the challenges that we had to solve in Latin America. Do you think FedEx was doing that kind of coordination with the monitor, with the hard drive, with the peripherals? Think about how you had to cross customs, right? And do you think FedEx and DHL have the kind of systems they have to support sales, home distribution or business distribution in Mexico, in Chile, in Colombia, in Venezuela? Not so much. In fact, one of our big challenges was most of the distribution that DHL, FedEx had been used to doing in Latin America was what kind of material? Paper, envelopes, right? So most of their vehicles were motorcycles, small cars, right? So that was a challenge. They were also not covered, right? Because if you have a small envelope, it can be in a little plastic pouch, right? You're sending computers, that's a big issue. The other thing is the computer's not working. How do you get it back? How do you deal with the customs? It was a massive logistics issue. It was a massive systems issue. Most people looked at that as a .com, and they had hired internet people to kind of think through it. I looked at that as a big systems issue and a systems challenge. And we worked through all of those things. And so we were able to open up the first Pan-American website. And we were able to reap an incredible number of profits. And we got first mover advantage. In fact, we went from number 6 to number 2 within 1 year by doing that. So as you can kind of tell, I think in systems. So I decided to start my own business. And let me go to the next one. Oh, I'll go back. I'll go. So here's what I did. So at the time, construction was really booming, okay? And I decided to create a company for myself. One of the things that people would come to me and they'd say, Sylvia, can you come? We're doing a construction design on a large building, an office complex, or even on a small residential house. The number one thing that they wanted me for was not my engineering expertise. What do you think they wanted me for?
Bilingual?
Yeah, bilingual. So here I am, an engineer, can read blueprints, I'm thinking about stuff, and the number one thing is, can you translate, paint, or, hammer, or jigsaw, or, there's like, I think 7 different types of saws just for drywall. It's like, wow. So here I was going around, and of course, I saw what people were doing, which is just using a dictionary or gesturing, right? So again, what would I do? I'd create a system, right? So I created a system, and that's what these are. They're CommuniCards. So basically, they allowed on-the-spot communication. So if you think of it, I boiled down all the basic things you needed to communicate, put pictures to them, in English and Spanish, the tools that you need, the safety instructions. Okay, I did this for a couple of types of different areas, like painting, lawn care, construction. Next thing you know, who's calling me? Police. The police say, can you do a traffic stop CommuniCard? Create a traffic stop CommuniCard, which I'm so grateful I did. I sold this. These I sold one at a time. This I sold thousands at a time. Really happy I did that one. But then my number 2 bestseller was, people would say, guess what? I have a housekeeper. I don't know how to talk to her. But I found that when we did our research that housekeeping has a lot of varied topics, and a lot of times the person isn't there when you're talking, when they're doing the work. Actually, the housekeeper sometimes is alone. So how do you let them know what item you want them to focus on? So then we created a deck of cards. So you just left the deck of cards out that have the illustrations. So I'm going to let you guys kind of pass these around and look. And we have now morphed into, we do quite a few of these. This is one for roadway construction. Okay, we've done highway construction structures. Here's another one you can pass around. This is the roadway one. We're working on another one. But then what happened was that companies came to me and said, Sylvia, I like the way you think. You've been able to boil a lot of complexity and create a system that's really easy to use and replicable, right? So the next thing I know is I'm being hired by large institutions, healthcare, education, and they're thinking, there's a lot of things going on. We need to systematize them. We need to be more efficient. We need to be more productive. And so I wanted to, as he mentioned, I won a ton of awards. But then I discovered, remember why did I start the company? Is that I wanted to not be traveling all the time and be really involved in my community. So I decided to really not take jobs outside of Texas. And actually I said I'm not going to take any jobs outside of Austin. And what I did is I did my analysis, I did my research, and I focused on the 2 key areas that were undergoing the most change: education and healthcare. Did some research, and wow, what did I discover? They're mostly, and no offense, I'm saying this here at a university, a lot of the systems are antiquated. They're built for the 20th century and not the 21st century. And so you're using 20th century infrastructure to deal with a 21st century population. So I was able to talk to different companies, and the next thing you know, I'm being hired at a healthcare institution, a large healthcare conglomerate. And they said, well, you know a lot about language, right? No, I'm an engineer. I know a lot about systems. But they were spending an absolute fortune in Spanish translation. An absolute fortune. Because they were hiring, because the way they defined the problem, they defined the problem of language as a language problem. They didn't define it as a communications or a systems problem. So for example, they would have a hand therapist. She did not speak Spanish. Almost all of her clients were Spanish speaking. So they would hire a translator to stand by her every day as she translated. The hand therapist was paid $40 an hour. The translator was paid $75 an hour. That kind of annoyed the hand therapist quite a bit, right? And then you're thinking, wow, you're paying over $100 an hour, right, to just communicate. As an example, we looked at that as a system, so what did we do? Created a videotape that people watched before they had their hand work. They did the same thing for phlebotomy. So all of a sudden, instead of just having to hire translators, you were able to create another way to deal with that. we looked at the way they did, that person was there. We saved them over $1 million. Over $1 million by looking at it from a systematic approach. The next thing is education. A lot of education is built around the baby boomer model, which is basically dad goes to work, mom is a stay-at-home mom, really involved in school, making sure that she's there for all these after-school activities, right? And a lot of our nonprofits are geared that way. That's really not the reality for 21st century public schools. So I began working with them, and to me, that's just a system that needs updating in terms of its focus on the market, which is the 21st century demographics. And especially in the West, and certainly in places like New Mexico and Texas and California, our population is rapidly changing. In Texas, in the year 2000, 82% of Texas was either Anglo or Hispanic in the year 2000. In the year 2040, 82% of Texas is going to be Anglo or Hispanic, but completely opposite. It's just amazing. In 2000, Anglos were 53% of Texas. In 2040, Hispanics are going to be 59% of Texas. But yet the system, especially educational, isn't really quite geared towards that massive demographic change. And so helping educators and educational systems and policymakers think about that. So what I've done is I've created what I call mobilization events. And people think, when they think about how you allocate resources, to me it's an asset-based allocation model. So what does that mean? When most of nonprofits were created, especially in the educational space in the United States, many of them were in the 1980 to 2000. The US had a certain kind of demographic. Now, we've got a much different demographic, especially in places like Texas and New Mexico. So when I started looking and researching, how can we better serve students with the same number of dollars, right? We can't spend any more dollars. How can we be more efficient, more productive? Did some research and found out that at the time, in 2007, in Austin, there were 62 educational nonprofits that were getting funding to serve the fast-growing Spanish-speaking market. Okay, wow. So these nonprofits said, in my grant, I serve this market. How many of those had Spanish speakers on staff? Right, less than 15. Less than 20 had material in Spanish. So what we did is looked at it as a system and just put some requirements. And so we created an event, and if you're an engineer, and especially an industrial engineer, you know, an event-based system, you're always thinking about events. So I created a community event, which we call the Mobilization Event. And on that day, we said to these nonprofits, we're going to bring all these people that you say you're serving. And you've got to show up ready. So at first people told us those parents don't come, those parents don't show up, they don't care about their kids' education. No one's ever come before. My first event in Austin, we had 3,500 people. And we created a systems approach of how you went through that fair. So if you think about most trade fairs or even just any kind of like community fair, you usually just walk in and you self-navigate. You figure it out. And most of the time, if the parent is Spanish speaking, who navigates for them? The child, because the child serves as a translator. We wanted to empower the parent because we knew the parent is the one we needed to reach to teach them about our U.S. educational system. So we created, like, you know, IKEA furniture store, or okay, yeah. So what, or Disneyland? You know, there's only one way in and one way out. So instead of us creating a regular fair with just tables everywhere where you self-navigated, we created the process flow. Sounds like an engineer again, right? Created the process flow, and every event we had scripted, which again sounds like manufacturing and process, right? We scripted every single communication with that parent. What do you mean? We gave, when the nonprofit talked to the parent, we had given them a 5-step script. As a result, we had hired the University of Texas to do research on us. They did longitudinal research. 90% of those parents got more involved in their kids' education. We were able to break all records in terms of magnet school participation by target groups. We had amazing community involvement. Last year we did this event, well in 2009 we did it for the 3rd time. We had 7,700 people there. We had a line of 500 people out the door. But guess what happened? Guess who came calling? Los Angeles. Los Angeles said, we have that same kind of problem, but on a much bigger scale. Can you do it? Because they were thinking I was an event manager. I'm not an event manager. What do? Systems. I got a system, and what can my system do? It can scale. So they hired me to go out to Los Angeles and said, can you create a mobilization event? We want to have that one day where we're tracking how many nonprofits that get all these millions of dollars to serve this community. We want them to show up ready. And I'll tell you, when we did this in Los Angeles, this is an embarrassing thing for them to admit. They said, don't worry, Sylvia, this is Los Angeles, everyone speaks Spanish, blah, blah, blah. We're on top of it. Every single nonprofit speaks Spanish. Do you know every single science nonprofit in that area did not have one Spanish speaker? The Children's Museum could not even send somebody who spoke Spanish. If you think the Los Angeles market, it was like amazing. Now there were a lot of nonprofits and they all did have people that spoke Spanish. Some of the major universities that we invited didn't have anyone on staff in their outreach to speak Spanish. It was pretty amazing. So that systems approach showed us what was their allocation model, what was their community ready to serve, and on the other hand, could it scale? People kept telling me, this is Los Angeles, but on the other hand, no one shows up. The year before, Cal State Dominguez Hills had sponsored this event, 300 people showed up. When we did our systems approach, 20,000 people showed up. It was massive, it was huge. Now, the state of Texas has hired me and wants me to do this in other parts of the state. It's basically a systems approach to a really pressing problem we have in the United States. And one of the things that we do, we show parents how to read to their kids and how to be involved. We also, there's a guy named Lance Armstrong, do you all know who he is? Bicycles, yeah. He's kind of big in Austin, okay? But one of the things that he said that really stuck with me is when he was asked, how is it that you can go down mountains at speeds of over 60 miles an hour and not crash? And he said, we do it, I can do it because I focus on where I want to go, not where I don't want to go. And as I've been involved in education, what I hear about the population, this big demographic shift, is I hear 3 things about the demographic shift. Well, I hear fear, which may be 4, but drugs, dropout, and teen pregnancies, especially in Texas. We're leading the nation in teen pregnancies. And those are the 3 things they hear. So when we looked at all the messaging and marketing and communication, so think about it as systems, we found that no one had ever seen pictures like this. No one had ever seen pictures of African American dentists, of doctors, of girl doctors, of vets. And so we realized that we had to show people where we wanted to go, not where we didn't want to go. So that's kind of what I'm doing now. So I've got my company, and we're being hired to do this kind of stuff. But one of the things I thought is, you're all not going to want to do that kind of systems thing. So I want to tell you a little bit about a big opportunity that exists today. And then some of kind of the discrete steps that if you say, wow, I want to be an entrepreneur, what do you need to think about? So one of the great opportunities that exists today is when you think about digital markets, what I call the 2 markets, 1 workforce. Youth markets. Youth markets drive technology, digital creation, internet content, social media. Youth markets drive that. And if you think about the student population here, a lot of it's bilingual, it's tech savvy, it's young, it's educated. You all know this is a Venn diagram. And so, which is so great, because I know I can say that here. But you see the big overlap. That is a sweet spot of opportunity. It is a massive sweet spot of opportunity. And to show you kind of how big it is, America's digital media markets. If you think again, and I have friends that work at Yahoo, Cisco, and what they told me is, Sylvia, we don't look at markets just by geography anymore. because a lot of our content no longer is passing through customs. We look at how content is consumed. How is it pulled down on the internet? And when they look at the Americas, they see how it's pulled down. And the content is pulled down in one of 3 languages: English, Spanish, or Portuguese. And remember, youth drive technology. So guess which markets are really pushing the edge? Spanish language and even Portuguese. So let's look at how big these markets are. Well, the United States, about 332 million people. And what's shocking to me is, Canada is only a little bit over 30 million. I always think it's bigger than that. It's really only about 10% of the US. And then there's other markets in there like Belize. But look at our median age, 38. Okay? Our youth market, about 100 million. Granted, probably one of the most affluent, even after the last few years of financial meltdown. It's probably one of the more affluent youth markets around the world. Let's look at the Spanish-speaking. Let's go to Brazil, which they speak Portuguese. For those of you who are kind of history buffs, Brazil today is almost identically, from a social, from a class, from a race, from an education place, where the US was in 1960. So the big question is, how will Brazil handle this great moment of opportunity? But they have 187 million people, which is kind of where the United States was in the 1960s. Check out their median age, 26, significantly younger. And their youth market is 80 million. Now, let's look at Spanish-speaking Americas, which includes the United States. Okay, it's about a market of 350 million. The median age is 24. Wow. And look at the size of the youth market, 175 million. So imagine if you're in a place that can tap English-speaking America, youth market, and Spanish-speaking. That's 275 million. That's bigger than China's teen market. You're getting close to the size of India's. It's around 300 million. So if you add Brazil, we were like over it. How can this group be accessed? Something you all have. This. Everything from ringtones, music, entertainment. You can now reach these populations with this. And last year, in 2008, this is an unusual factoid, but more cell phones were sold than toothbrushes in Latin America. It's not good for dental health, but it kind of tells you the quick and rapid opportunity there. So when I look at you here, the other thing I wanted to also say, Brazil has 80 million Afro-Brazilians. Colombia has a ton of Afro-Colombians. So I really want you to think about language isn't by the color of your skin. A bilingual, educated workforce gives you and gives our country a competitive advantage. It's one of the things India did to be very successful, have a very educated workforce, but it was bilingual as well. So it's allowed them a tremendous opportunity. So this is one of the things as you are thinking about, well, gosh, I want to create a company or I want to do something. This is a big market opportunity. Huge, huge market opportunity. Our friends in India are very much looking at this. In fact, India has a strategic perspective of saying, I can take Bollywood and go directly to Latin America. I don't have to go through the US. Hollywood is under tremendous assault from Bollywood, and if you follow what's happening is a lot of Indian producers are suddenly, hablando español, heading all over South America because they want to produce their content for this very large market. Anyway, that's another area to think about. But one of the things I want to talk to you about is taking your idea to the bank. One of the great things about this particular product, even though that's not our core business anymore, we did it to solve a problem. We are constantly getting orders to do other types of products like that. We call that mailbox money, where you have stuff that like checks just appear in your mailbox. But also people pay you for this kind of stuff. So it's paying me for the way I think, the way I solve problems, the way I define problems. So how do you go from brain to bank? So first is you got to identify your concept. What is it that you're thinking about doing? And ever since I created that product, I've got to tell you, I've had so many people come up to me with amazing ideas. Some of them kind of, I think the market is pretty small, like a light diode on an arrow, so that you can go, shooting arrows at night. Might be a big one, I don't know, that's not my market expertise, but it's just amazing how many people have an idea for a product they want to create. One that was amazingly successful that seemed to me to be a big duh was especially for Mexicans, we do tamales, and we use a big spoon to spread the masa on a corn husk. This woman patented a plastic device that basically did the same thing. She sold she's made millions on that. It's like, she said, I always wanted to have something a little bit better, so ever since she was a kid, she was always trying to find the right thing. She designed it, she patented, and she sold that quite a bit. So I've seen just about like every different types of things. One that I found was really interesting is sometimes you can take an idea that exists today and just tweak it to a different market. One of my favorite examples of that is the air containers that clean out your keyboards on your laptops. The first guys to work at that, they were in the camera business. And they saw these at camera stores, you would sell these pressurized compressed air. But it was only distributed to camera stores. They had a really good idea of calling it computer keyboard cleaner, putting a label on it. They went to Office Max, and they did incredibly well. So your idea sometimes doesn't have to be like, wow, I'm going to figure something out that's new and novel. It's sometimes taking an idea and shifting it and looking at maybe a different market. Another one is this woman who was in the back office of a medical complex, and all she did every day was file. Well, one day she said there's got to be a better way of doing it, and so she created the color-coded system that we use for medical records. She patented the system, and then she sold it. She actually sold that for $1.3 million. And she had been just sitting in the back, but she thought there's got to be a better way. So if you're an entrepreneur and thinking about stuff, you can either think about it like, I'm going to create something brand new, or I'm going to solve a problem, or maybe there's a way I can take an existing application, tweak it, and maybe market it with a kind of a different name for another growing market opportunity. So those are things to think about. One of the things is you've got to create a prototype and get it tested. A really challenging thing that entrepreneurs have is we like to talk to people who tell us our ideas are great, and then the people who don't tell us our ideas are so wonderful, we kind of shy away from them. But when you're really going to use your own money, your own investment, and launch a company and get investment and investors, you've got to make sure that you're testing your product with people who aren't related to you and telling you that it's a wonderful product. You need to have people who give you honest and real feedback. Test it. You'd be amazed how the products get used. When we did our first CommuniCards and we did some samples, we originally thought a book was going to work, and we found that a book didn't work for a variety of reasons. So we created a variety of prototypes. And we knew we were onto something when we created these prototypes and had them out in the field, and no one would give them back because they were using them so much. So it's really valuable to make sure that you go out there and test it. The look and feel is very important on the product. Those of you, you'll see a little bit of nerdiness, but if you see that our products, they're laminated and they kind of fall into place really easily. We did a lot of work to make sure that we had the right kind of coating, and actually the diameter on the curves on every one of them is a little bit different, slightly, like by millimeters, but that's so it folds very neatly, fits into your pocket very snugly. So as they go around again, kind of look at that, because we spent a lot of time working on that design. So people they say, I can get a dictionary for the same price and I can do all sorts of different industry fields. You've only got this one thing for this one, vocabulary for this one, but ours is so easy to use. By the time you're thumbing through, trying to figure it out, you've already communicated your topic. So we spent a lot of time with that. And make sure that whatever you're working on excites you. Because one of the things about being an entrepreneur, there's highs, and then there's lows. And you're the one that's really got to believe in it. And if you don't believe, and if your product doesn't excite you, then you're not going to be able to get anyone else excited about it. I've got to tell you this is the legal part, and it's not the legal disclaimer, but this is how you protect yourself. This is how you make sure that you get value, and your product is valued, you've got to safeguard your intellectual property. And systems can be patented. Processes can be patented. So remember that woman that did the color tags for medical? That's the systems that she processed and patented. So we've got a lot of industrial engineers in here or other folks. You think, well, I'm just doing processes. You can patent processes, okay? Make sure that you use supplier agreements to make sure that when others do work for you, you own it. Because believe it or not, people will go out and say, you hired me to do this, I figured it out, so I own the solution. And you're like, wait a minute, that's not how we work it. So you've got to make sure you have supplier agreements in place so that you own the content. Systems, I talked about that. Oh, there are different parts of the country that have specialists. I have a friend who was really into tea, but she didn't live in a part of the country that the lawyers and people knew a lot about tea and the distribution. She had to go to Seattle, home of Starbucks and coffee. You think they know a lot about tea and coffee and distribution channels and that? Yeah. Do you think it's a lot easier to get a lawyer who's well versed on all that there? Yeah, that's very much the case. If you've got a consumer product that you want to get into a major merchandiser like Target, you're probably going to want to go to Cincinnati, home of Procter & Gamble. There are so many outfits that just deal with consumer product goods in that area. And then obviously if you're going to do technology, Austin, Silicon Valley. If you have an art idea or that kind of concept, you're probably going to go to New York. If you have games or toys, a lot of that is still in Southern California. Money saving tips, you can use NOLOpress.com. Rich Dad, Poor Dad has, their book series has a lot about that. The other thing too is you can hire a legal assistant to do a lot of the legwork. And so it's really important that maybe if you want to save some money, to go read about what's the difference between a trademark, copyright, read all that stuff so that you're not paying a lawyer $175, $200 an hour to explain what you could have read. And also filling out paperwork, a legal assistant will do it at a lot less cost than a lawyer, and then you just hire the lawyer to review the final paperwork. So those are kind of things that you can also do to save you a little bit of money. Sales and marketing, really key. You need a profit, not just revenue. And cash flow is king. Cash flow for businesses, it's like breathing. So I say cash flow is oxygen. So making sure you've got the money. So even though I work with institutions, I've got to tell you this year, when there was the financial meltdown, and I work with, state of Texas, and the large school districts and counties and large healthcare institutions, they decided to not pay for 90 days, 120 days. Do you think the people I'm working with want to wait 120 days to get paid? Not so much. So cash flow and managing cash flow is very important. So you need a profit. Understand it's a global market. Realize your products can go overseas in no time. You've got to think about your marketing positioning, your name, the positioning, the solution. How do you get the product in your consumers' hands? When we first started the CommuniCards, there were lots of distribution channels. Amazon and Walmart wiped out a lot of them. So now there are very few fulfillment centers. So understand your distribution channels, obviously direct to internet sales, and how do you communicate? How do you do promotions? PR strategies are key. So, and I talked about cash flow as oxygen. We talked about venture capital and figuring out how you get paid. And now wrapping it up, what I really want you to know is language is a software of the 21st century, so there's a lot of opportunities because it's a global market. So business will be, English is the language of business, but sales and services is going to be done in the local languages. And for the first time ever, we've got some very large markets They're outside the United States, and we need to service and sell them in their local language. So there's a big opportunity, lots of opportunities. And a bilingual educated workforce, that's who's got the edge in the 21st century. I can see that it's time for the hook. You haven't asked any questions, but I'm very happy to take some questions, and I thank you for being so attentive as well on a Friday afternoon.
Questions?
Yeah.
Just curious, how old were you when your first company tanked that you got acquired and stuff?
I was 42.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things I've also learned, don't spend all the money you make and save some, because that came in really handy. And also to diversify my risk, which I didn't do. I just, you know, owning $36,000 in shares, 36,000 shares, and seeing them just keep going up. You know, I just never thought that they could also, you know, first law, gravity, what goes up must come down. So that was, yeah, so I was 42. So I still had time to recover as well.
Do you think you had a chance to start earlier? Do you think you had already acquired the skills you needed earlier, or?
Good question. It's about how much experience do you need in that? You know, I do feel like doing a lot of the international work that I've done, the business training, that was really helpful. It is very important just to learn the mechanics of running a business, profit and loss, your balance sheet, that kind of stuff. So if you can figure out maybe when you're in a corporate job, if you don't have large venture capital behind you or big funders behind you, to start figuring out small business ideas on the side and figuring out how do you do that? How do you actually incorporate a company? How do you sell stuff? That is really important. So maybe you're an affiliate for somebody, or maybe you do a small franchise for somebody. But just acquiring, as an engineer, sometimes we didn't always learn all those business skills, and so it's important to learn those business skills at some point. In terms of age, you know, when you have a great idea and you can harness the right people around you, and I think that's the right time to go to do it. I don't feel like you should ever live your life like you shoulda, woulda, coulda, I wish I had done that, or whatever. Life is to be lived. And you know, failure is part of it. I mean, having failed and having lost a year of my time and all that in that company, you know, I wouldn't give it back. I learned so much in that time as well. I wish I would have obviously done my risk management a little bit better, but that taught me, so now I do that. Yes, in the back.
I noticed that the CommuniCard said patent pending on it.
Yeah.
Did you apply for a patent?
Yeah, because
how long
it's,
ago?
oh gosh, a little bit over 2.5 years ago. And that's just such an onerous process. Yeah, I learned after we did it that you could apply. It's a system, it's a process, and it can be patented. And so right now we're still in the process of getting all that done. That's where I learned, because I first just went to a lawyer and had them fill out all the paperwork, and that's where I learned, wow, I could do it a lot cheaper to have done it with a legal assistant to do some of the work, not all of the work, and then just have them file the key paperwork for us. But we have successfully gotten the CommuniCard trademark, which is interesting because Intel was using the word CommuniCard, and they had never, after we had started using it, and they had not trademarked it, and they had not done their trademark, so they had to stop using it. So. Anybody back there? No one have any questions?
Other questions?
One last question.
Sure.
So when you were talking about patenting, is that so complicated that you kind of do need to hire somebody for that? Or?
You know, the whole patent process, yes, you do need to hire patent lawyers that understand that process, but you can hire like some of the legal assistants that do a lot of the patent work beforehand.
You really can't do it on your own.
I have never heard of a good experience of like those you hear on TV. You know, we'll get your patent project, we'll get your idea patented. I've never heard of a good experience of that. So, if you've got the time or the legal background, maybe you could do it. I don't know. Somebody else? All right. well, I'm still gonna be around, and there's food out there, and it's Friday afternoon. So I wanna thank you for the time, thank you for being here, and it's been a pleasure to come back to NMSU and to be on this side and not over there. All right, thank you.